All right, all right. Hello again, everyone. This is the last session of the conference. So we are with Todd Gardner to talk about success on your own terms, aka the soft skill side of the talks from the day. And then afterwards, we will move on for the last part, very last part, raffle winner announcements and closing. So thank you so much for your time today. And without further ado, I will leave the stage all to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and watching my talk. I was here last year at the last year's event, and you invited me back. So that must mean that you like my stories. So we're going to do it again. And if that's true, you're in luck because this talk is all about stories. If you're not familiar with who I am, and why would you be? I think it's important to, ground a talk about success with who's the person talking, because there's a lot of charlatans out there, especially in like the whole self-help kind of world. And so it's important to know, like, do you actually know anything? Like, what experience are you speaking from? Why do you care about what I have to say about success? And I think there's a couple of important things that are at least unusual about me. There's lots of things that are unusual about me, but a couple of things that I think are aspirational. And I'm going to tell you some stories today about how I got here. The first is I run my own software business. So I don't work for anybody else. I work for myself, and not as a consultant right now. I build software with a couple of people who I've been working with for over 10 years to write software, specifically Track.js and request metrics, that helps customers directly. That gives me a ton of control of my time and my own financial stability. Second, I am financially comfortable. Like, success for a lot of people is heavily based on how much money they make. They have the financial time and freedom to do what they want. I have 2 nice cars. I have a nice house. I can do those sort of things. I control my own time, being that I don't have to punch a clock. I can go on vacations. I can do fun things. And I've had the opportunity to like live out a lot of my dreams. I hosted a game show on like a giant stage. I host comedy events. I get to kind of have the flexibility to do some things that I like. And lastly, I'm just kind of awesome. I'm at a point in my life where I am feeling more comfortable and confident than I have ever felt in my life about what I do, what I've done, what I can bring to the table. And I want to share that today with all of you, some stories about how I got here, some painful lessons I learned along the way, and what you can learn from them. So that's what this talk is about. I'm going to tell you 6 stories today about how I got where I am right now. And as part of that, 6 lessons from those stories that help me define what do I actually want out of my life, my career, what is success for me today. So that's what we are going to talk about right now. So let's jump into that with the first story. What does success mean to you? Because it's not always the same thing for everybody. This whole talk is about professional success and what does that mean? But it doesn't mean the same thing for everybody and doesn't mean the same thing for your whole life. Success could mean money, time, prestige, notoriety, power, influence, or any combination of those things. What is valuable to you? Some people are perfectly fine, like not necessarily making a ton of money, but being influential in software. They want to own like a really influential open source project that lots and lots of people use, and that's what they feel is important to them and their success. Other people are, all about the money, and they just want to have, a nice life. And so it's important to know, what is it that you want? Don't define your success in the terms of what somebody else wants. So way back at the beginning of my career, my first job out of college, out of university, was for a small manufacturing company that made giant spinning knives, which sounds really cool. Unfortunately, it wasn't that cool. It was actually for a company called Toro that made lawnmowers. But that's really boring. And so I like to say that they made giant spinning knives, which is also accurate. I worked at Toro for 7 years, my first 7 years of professional work. And it was comfortable. It was easy. I was pretty smart. I made enough money that I was comfortable. I put in my 40 hours and I went home. And I didn't really have any plans for where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do or any sort of idea for what success in my own life looked like. But then one day, I got into a car accident, a pretty bad one, actually. The seatbelt, when the accident happened, punctured one of my intestines, and they were worried that I was bleeding internally. And I was rushed off to an emergency room and had surgery. And I was in the hospital for 2 weeks and almost died. And it's amazing how fast everything in your life can change. It had been, for me, when this happened, it had been months or years of kind of the same thing. I'd get up, I'd go to work, kind of half-ass my job at work. I'd come home, I'd sit in front of the TV or play video games or whatever. And it was the same thing. I wasn't learning, I wasn't doing, I wasn't getting better. There wasn't anything pushing me to go and do better. I made okay money, I had okay work, but then bang, in the hospital. And I was there for 2 weeks and another 6 months of recovery. And I remember lying there in that hospital bed, regretting what little I had done with my life. Like if I had died that day, I would be a low-level employee for a lawnmower manufacturer. And they would replace me in a couple of weeks. And I always thought that I was going to have more time to do something. There was going to be another day, another project, something that would push me to do something that I would be proud of. But that can all end just in an instant. Which brings me to like the first lesson that really kind of pushed everything else forward is that none of us have as much time as we think we do. Like we might think that like, oh, I have until I'm 65 or I have until I'm 80 or however long you think you have, but it could end tomorrow through no choice of your own. And so every day we have should be a day that we're trying to like move forward towards what do we want? What do we want our life to be? What do we want success to look like for us? What do we need to do so that we're proud of ourselves in this time that we have? This was one of the most significant experiences of my life, and I would never wish it on any of you. But it did light a fire under me. And today could be your last day. So to take opportunities when you can. This incident kind of put me into my first thought process about what success should look like for me. I wanted to work on something important. The things that were running through my mind was nobody would remember me for anything that I did. And I wanted to work on something important, something that meant something. I wanted to work on things that people knew about, software that would actually help people, so that if it all ended tomorrow for me, I would leave behind work that I was proud of. So that's my first story for you today. It's about how I found my way to actually give a crap about my own future and decide what I wanted to do. I think most of you are probably already ahead of me there because I would never have been at a conference. I would never have been like talking to somebody about, improving myself at that phase in my life. And so many of you are probably already on that journey trying to decide what is it that you want to do to get better. Because you're here and you care. And I think that's a big step. So after I kind of recovered and I started thinking about like, how do I go about doing this? I wanted to work on something important, but I didn't really have the confidence in myself to do that yet. There were a lot of engineers out there and leaders around me that I was looking up to, and they were building cool projects and they were influential at big companies or creating their own thing or doing interesting things. But I wanted to be that, but I had a lot of imposter syndrome happening. I don't know if it was imposter syndrome or if it just wasn't any good, but I thought I wasn't ready yet and that I probably should learn some more stuff, business stuff. Like I was pretty good at computers. I was pretty good at software. I could do a lot of that stuff and I could learn that stuff really fast, but I didn't really understand the whole thing about making money. And so my wife and several other people who I had looked up to had gone back to school and gotten their MBA, their master's of business degree. And that seemed like a great idea. Grad school would give me some credibility to work on the important projects that I was really after, and hopefully teach me not to screw it up too badly. So I enrolled in a grad school program near me called the Management of Technology. It was a lot like an MBA, but it had a bit of an engineering focus. Um, when I was putting together these slides, I typed into one of the image AI tools and said, generate me a picture of a smartass MBA consultant. And this picture came out, which I don't know, probably looks like a lot of people you know. I met a bunch of really, really smart people in grad school, but I also met some of the dumbest people in grad school. Some of them were my teachers. I had a marketing professor who was a real life VP of marketing at a company that you probably heard of that didn't know how social media worked. I had a professor who sat on a dozen boards of big companies, and every single one of his presentations looked like this. That's 5 different fonts in 5 different colors. Every slide, every presentation he gave us looked like this, and it was driving us all crazy. He could not communicate anything effectively. And I had this ongoing argument for a whole semester with my IT professor, who kept teaching us that agile projects all failed and that all serious companies followed a strict software development process. I'm not entirely sure that that guy ever had a real job outside of academia. But I did learn some useful skills despite some not the brightest people I interacted with. I learned how to make accounting reports. I learned how to read between the lines on financial statements. I learned how to think about product development and marketing and all of that sort of thing. But the real thing I learned, the real thing that I paid $70,000 in tuition to get, what was the most valuable thing that I got? Is that everybody is really just making it up as they go. And you can too. Really, I wasn't any lesser than the engineers and leaders that I looked up to. And I didn't need anybody's permission to start doing the things I wanted to do. Just because I didn't know how to do it doesn't mean that I couldn't figure it out as I went. And there's not a whole lot of like really hard rules anywhere in our work. We can just kind of figure it out as we go, and that's okay because that's what everybody else did too. Look, I saved you $70,000 more because tuition's probably more expensive now. You're welcome. So that's my second story about going to grad school and getting the confidence to do the things that I wanted to do, not because I learned anything fundamental that I wouldn't have learned elsewhere, but because it taught me that the people who look important and successful are making it up as they go, just like everybody else, and you can too. So then it was 2010, and I had completely recovered from my car accident at this point, and I had this piece of paper saying that I was now qualified to do important work. So now what? So I looked around for some different jobs. And the jobs at various places that looked interesting and important, but they all kind of sounded boring. They sounded like it was going to be the same grind, the same punching tickets. I grab a ticket and I do this thing and I center a div on for Internet Explorer and blah, and it didn't really matter. It felt like the same grind, the same work with just a different logo on it. And while I was kind of hunting around trying to figure out what important thing I wanted to do, I met this guy. This is Nicky Wicked. And he was the guitarist for a band called Slave Raider. They were a rock metal band in Minneapolis in the 1980s, and they were pretty popular. They got some play on MTV and stuff like that. Of course, when I met him, he looked like this instead, and went by the name David Hussman, which is not nearly as cool as Nicky Wicked. And he hung had hung up his guitar to join the software world a number of years ago, but he's one of the few real life rock star developers that I have ever met. And even though he wasn't in a metal band anymore, he was still very cool. Like he could roll into any C-level meeting at like a Fortune 100 company in shorts and sandals and get the executives to basically call him the dude and work them through all the stupid stuff that their teams were doing, getting in the way of actually building valuable software. He was an agile consultant. And he had these simple, funny, brilliant constructs they would use to get people thinking about new ways to build software, like this thing called the Dude's Law, which I still see referenced from time to time. Of value in what you're doing is just why over how. And so if you want to create more value, you either have to have a better why or you need to get a lesser how. And that's what it all kind of boiled down to. And he could put this slide up and talk for 8 hours, telling stories and just have the whole audience riveted. He was super entertaining. And how if more organizations thought like this, we could build more awesome stuff for the world. David showed me a different kind of career success. He showed me independence. He was his own person. He followed his own rules, and he had his own dress code. He didn't work for one company. He worked for himself and helped lots and lots of different companies as a consultant. And he shifted my idea of what I thought I wanted to be more about independence. I saw it as a path to work on more of the projects I wanted without any of the corporate bullshit that I hated. Now, David introduced me to the world of staff augmentation, which is a really boring word. He used much cooler words like embedded agile coaching to talk about what he did. But still, it was fundamentally about going into existing companies as a consultant and augmenting their staff to help them accomplish things, coaching them from inside. He saw the role as a coach for like a sports team, helping them play a better game of software development. And he wanted me to be one of those coaches. So how would that work? How does this world work? So some company has a big, ambitious project, something that I wanted to be part of as part of my need for prestige. And they need more engineers than they typically have on staff. And so, but they have a bunch of like capital dollars to spend to make it happen. So they go out to a contracting firm, or as David would call it, an agile coaching dojo, to hire some more help, usually 6 months at a time. Now, there's some great big consulting firms. Maybe some of you work for them, but there's also a lot of little small ones, little boutique ones, where they don't necessarily even have employees. They have subcontractors. They just place people who know how to do things, and they take a cut of the hourly rate. Independence, like me. David helped me set up my own thing so that I could be one of those subcontractors. And this isn't at all an unusual situation. Of course, it varies depending on where you are in the world, even what city you're in. But in the city that I'm in, and lots of other cities I visited, this is super common. And a lot of the best developers who I've ever encountered are these independent people. Now, it's kind of scary. It's more than kind of scary. Oop. This was a big, scary decision to do. I had to give up a solid, dependable salary that had been my foundation for a long time. And I had to start my own company. I had a client that was already kind of lined up through David, but what if they hated me? What if I sucked? What if I was a bad consultant? What if I couldn't find another when that contract ended? What was I going to do? Because I wasn't going to get paid for 90 days. What if it ended before I got paid? Was any of this reliable? It was a terrifying time to strike out on my own, because how was I going to manage my own cash flow? I wasn't going to be getting a paycheck. I had to invoice a client and then hope that they paid me and hope that they paid me on time so that I could still, pay my mortgage and pay for food and live. It's a slow process. And in this leap, I was going to be without a paycheck for about 12 weeks during that transition. And it was going to be financially tight, stressful, and pretty risky, because this wasn't just me. We had just had our second child. She looks just like me in this picture. We had to take out a loan from a retirement savings account, which involved quite a bit of accounting trickery to pull off, just to manage through cash flow at the time and still have food to eat. And I'd have a bunch of big penalties to pay back if I failed. My wife and I had talked about this a lot, about whether it was worth the risk. And we were joking that, if this whole thing fell apart, that we were going to have to like sell the house and move into my parents' basement to get back on our feet if this didn't work out. And to her credit, she still told me to do it. She's like, you can do this, Todd. You got this. Go do it. It's worth the risk. So we did it. Remembering my lesson from grad school, if everybody's just making this up as they go, I can too. So this was what I was shooting for. This was independence. This was prestige. This was more money. This was the project I wanted. And so I went for it. And just like this photo is from, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he steps out over the giant canyon to his death. And it turns out there's this hidden bridge sitting there that he couldn't see. And I made it, just like Indy. My client loved me. When my 6-month contract ended for that first period, they wanted to extend me, and I raised my rates. I worked on that project for 18 months before deciding of my own choice to move on to another challenge. And it was amazing. I worked as part of consulting, both on that project and on other ones. I worked with some of the best engineers who I've ever worked with. People who would astonish me with their creative solutions. There were some hard technical challenges on every project I went on. Nothing was trivial. But the hardest part about any of the projects that I participated in with it as a consultant was building relationships. It's the most challenging part of anything I've ever done, is talking to people, building the relationships and creating teams with other people that you need to get the job done, to really understand the problems, to launch effective solutions, to operate a system once you're done. Because I can't do the work by myself. None of us can do the work by ourselves. I can't decide what to build by myself. I don't see the problems, but together we can create. I can be a more successful consultant and a more successful employee if I make myself indispensable to the teams that I work with by bringing people together and acting as this bridge between different people who can talk. So not by being some arcane knowledge holder, but by being a connector between teams, can you really make yourself indispensable? You know everybody and you know who has the answer to the problem. And that was the real key to me being successful as a consultant, or really any time in my career. Looking back, my ability to build relationships is much more relevant and important to my success than any individual technical skill. So if you're deciding on how to invest in yourself and what you should feel better at, maybe don't spend your time learning the next hot JavaScript framework, and instead work on how do you get out and network with people and build trust and communicate your ideas effectively to other people. Because I think that would have much more lasting and impactful benefits to you and your career. Relationships got me into that job initially. It earned me the respect of David Hussman, who trusted me with one of his clients. Building relationships and teams is why I excelled at consulting. And whenever I would start with a new client, I would always spend that first 6 weeks just crushing it, spending way more time than I ever billed them for, learning about the code and the people and the political structures within that company so that I could help them get out of their own way and build those relationships effectively. I saw this tweet as I was building this talk and from my friend April, and I feel like she captured the moment that she learned this lesson in her own life. She learned that communication and building teams is what's really important. And I think she was being kind of snarky with this tweet, but it's also just very true. At this point, I'm convinced the best thing you can do to develop your career as a staff security engineer, which is how she works, isn't learning technology, but instead building back-channel relationships with other security engineers across the industry. Again, I think she was being snarky, but that's absolutely true. Building relationships is how you excel. So that is my third story and my third lesson about the importance of building relationships with other people and how that's way more important than your technical know-how. Always choose communication skills over tech skills when evaluating what you need to be better at. So consulting for me was great. I got the prestigious projects I wanted. I was proud of the things that I built. I've definitely built stuff that like all of you have worked on or used or touched in some way. And I made a real impact on the world. I made good money, more than double what I was making as an employee. But what I didn't have was time. Fundamentally, I was trading my time for money. I would give them an hour and they would give me some dollars. If I wanted to keep more of my hours, I didn't make as much money. I wanted to find a way to keep more of my hours and keep money. And so after several years of consulting, the definition of success started shifting for me into controlling more of my time. I didn't necessarily want to work 40 hours a week every week. I wanted to choose to travel sometimes, or choose to take some time off. Or if I'm really excited about something, choose to crush it and just work really hard. Prestige was part of my idea of success, but I wanted to work on something that helped people, something interesting. Money is always important. That may sound crass, but it is. Money enables you to control your time. So now I had all of these things that I wanted to try and get. And how do I do that? Now, money, I'm not trying to like make grand overlord money. I'm not trying to make Elon Musk money. I'm not trying to rock Lambos. I'm trying to have guacamole money. So there's this restaurant where I live called Chipotle. I don't know if you have that, but good burritos, Mexican food, but they charge a little extra if you want to put guacamole on it. I never wanted to worry about getting that extra guacamole. It should just be like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. Give me the guacamole. That's it. I wanted comfortable money, guacamole. So great. How am I going to do that? How do you get out of trading dollars for, or trading hours for dollars? If you're not going to sell your time, you have to sell something else. And so I tried a lot of different ideas. I built proof of concepts for lots of different product ideas. But a mistake I made over and over again, like I tried to make a content site. I tried to make a training site. I tried to make various different like software tools that did different things. But a mistake that I was making over and over again was over engineering. And I think we've all done it. It's a natural tendency for engineers. We decide we want to say, we're going to write a blog post. Let's say you after this talk, you want to write a blog post about things you learned. Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is write your own blogging engine, right? Because clearly none of the ones that exist out there will be right for your unique style. But no, of course, that's wrong. You put your first post up on GitHub Pages or Ghost or Medium or WordPress or whatever. You don't write that yourself. That risk of over-engineering applies to everything. You're building as a developer because we have a tendency to want to build. We like building. Building is fun. Talking to customers and doing marketing work is hard. We find lots of reasons to not do it. If you're coming from a corporate developer world, which I think a lot of you are, I think it's even harder to avoid over-engineering because the risks in our work shifted, but we don't realize it. When you work as a company, for example, somebody else has taken on the risk of the product failing. Like some executive, some marketing group, some product group they're holding on to the risk of whether or not that product is a success or a failure. Your risk as an engineer individually is to get that feature done in a timely, performant, and responsible way that won't create a bunch more work down the road. And so that's what just about everybody who talks about like software quality at a tech conference is talking about. It's talking about that internalized risk of this is what a developer in a corporate background is worried about. And they'll often say things like, it'll be harder to fix later if we don't build this thing right, if we don't build this thing with all these tests, with all of this indirection. Or worse, it'll never get fixed at all. But if you're building a product yourself as an indie product developer, which this is way more your vibe probably, late nights at a coffee shop or whatever, those are not your biggest risks. You don't really, the risks that you feel are not about, is the code going to be fast and error-free and all of those things. The risks are those things that all got offloaded in that corporate world. Is anybody going to care that I built this thing? That's it. That's the risk. Nothing else is even close to that level of risk in what you're doing. And so until you solve that, until you know that you're building something that somebody gives a crap about, none of those other things like performance or separation concerns or quality, none of those things are really important yet. They're only important once that first risk of does anybody care is solved. And so that leads to this important piece of wisdom when you're building your own things, is that if you're not embarrassed of it, you're waiting too long to ship it. You need to get it out there as fast as you possibly can so that you can learn from it. You can see how it works. How do people use it? Does anybody find it? Are they using that cool feature you built? Are they using it in the way you expected them to? Is it maybe a little slow? Yeah. Does it maybe be fragile and it's uncomfortable to like change that code? Sure, it should be. It should be, because you should do every trick in your book to get it out as fast as possible to that customer so that you can learn, did it work? Does anybody care? The first time you hack together some one file procedural code thing with no tests and just ship it to see if they like it, then you feel like you're really okay with it, that's when you're ready to build your own products. And until you can get over those other things, you're probably over engineering it a little bit. Now, that's not to say you didn't build a disaster once you find something that works. Once you have something valuable that customers use, you've probably created some not quite so stable foundations. And all of those other risks around performance and quality and separations concerns are super relevant again. But they'll tell you that you were right. It will be hard to fix later. And it will be. It will be hard to fix later. But it doesn't matter, because there might have been 5 or 10 or 100 projects that you built and just threw away as garbage before finding something that actually worked. And you wouldn't want to have wasted a lot of your time polishing those turds that nobody cared about. It's a lot harder to throw away code if you spent a lot of time over optimizing it. Or if it's already a piece of crap, you can just chuck it and move on and start fixing the things that actually work. Over-engineering is one of the biggest challenges if you want to go out and start building your own things. Now, the first project of mine that wasn't a giant turd, that deserved to be polished, was a tool called Track.js. Track.js is a JavaScript error monitoring service. And I had this idea based on a bunch of common problems I had while I was consulting. So lots of companies were building these big JavaScript apps, and like all software, they would break sometimes. And there wasn't really good tooling to understand that something had gone wrong, because most infrastructure monitoring tooling at the time was very focused on server side, and what would happen in a browser wasn't interesting. So we had this very interesting niche where we could come in and we could augment what was going on. Now, I had this idea for Track.js back in 2013, and I knew it was too big for me to do this one by myself. And that's not just because I was over engineering it. It was because like there was just so many facets of like figuring this product out and seeing if people wanted it that I knew I needed to have other people involved. And so, remembering my earlier lesson that building relationships is way more relevant to my success than the technical skill behind it, I leveraged a bunch of the relationships that I had while consulting to build a team of people that I knew were also interested in making this leap to building products and controlling more of their own time. And so I created this team that we were going to build something. And then I went to the local JavaScript user group, which was a monthly thing that, I had a good relationship with the people involved there, because I wrote a lot of JavaScript at the time. And I found that the next JavaScript group was 5 weeks away. So we had to get something done by then. And this was a great way to help us as a team not over-engineer it. It's like, we have a demo in 5 weeks. What can we get done in 5 weeks to see if this is an idea that works at all? And so we built something. We built something in those 5 weeks, kind of hacking nights and weekends on it. None of us were full-time on this project. We had consulting jobs that we were tending to, but we got something done. The code was awful. It was terrible. And the UI was pretty rough. This is one of the first versions of our UI, but it worked, at least in Chrome, for certain kinds of errors. We shipped something and we got it in front of people to see, does anybody care about this? Because if you're not embarrassed, you waited too long to ship. And we were very, very embarrassed of this first version. But I gave the demo, and there was a lot of excitement, actually. Most importantly, two companies who were in the audience, or two people from companies, said they wanted to use it, like now. And I thought to myself, shit, this doesn't actually work right now. But it was a hugely positive signal. And my team and I, we kept pushing on it for another 3 months, still nights and weekends kind of on the side, to make our first fully stable, usable version. And we brought on our first users and they loved it. So Track.js became a thing. It slowly grew over the last 11 years. This was 11 years ago when we started it, and it's still running very much alive today and continuing to grow and helping people all over the world. Track.js grew and changed over those first few years. We realized how important it was to talk about what we were doing, how important marketing is to developers. Not just building the product, but we actually had to talk about the things that we were building. We learned how to sell and market our product and how to differentiate ourselves versus the much bigger players that existed in the market. And it evolved into something really, really cool. It's this little library that goes into your web application, regardless of what you're using, and it collects errors and unhandled situations and all kinds of other faults from real production environments. And it does it in a really simple, straightforward, developer-friendly way that, tends to get lost in much bigger APM tools that are more about building management reports. It takes a lot of those errors and it sends those back where we normalize all that data and give developers the actual tools they need to understand it. So here's some more screenshots about what it is and how we do it. Over the first 3 or 4 years, Track.js we transformed that product into something real, something that didn't we built it in a basement. And it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. There's this old adage in founder circles, if you build your own products or are thinking about it, that we get to choose which 80 hours per week we want to work. And that's not at all unfounded. I worked a lot of hours in those early years. A lot of weeks where I would put 40 hours into a consulting engagement and then come home and have another 40 hours into Track.js. And it was exhausting. It's when all this gray hair started popping out. And honestly, those were some pretty dark times for me. I was giving everything I had to try and make this work. And your ego, when you're building a product and it's your thing, your ego gets tied up in it, into the thing. You become the thing you're building. I was Track.js, and saying something about Track.js was saying something about me, which is not at all a healthy attitude. And it's not true anymore, but it was for a long time. So for example, we would land a big customer on a Monday and I would be elated. It'd be the best day of my life. And on Tuesday, somebody would say something mean about me on Twitter or mean about Track.js on Twitter, and it would crush me. It would just be something like, I don't like Track.js as much as I like blah, blah, other similar tool. And it would just bring me to tears. Literally a tweet saying somebody preferred a different tool would crush me. And there were many, many days through this hard process due to overwork and, trying to market it and trying to talk about it and good days and bad days and all that I really wanted to quit. And in my head, I did quit. I had checked out many times, but I always came back. I always came back and continued fighting to do this thing. And I did that because of two people. And the first is Erin. Erin is my wife, and she has been my champion and supporter on this since day one. She is so smart and ambitious. She's not an engineer, but when Track.js started, she saw the opportunity and what it could do and what it could mean for both the customers, what it could do, and what it could mean for us and our family. And so she's been there through everything. She's helped me negotiate deals. She's helped me figure out marketing things. She's reviewed content. And when I needed heads down to figure something out and get it done, she handled everything else in my life to make that happen. But most importantly, she never let me quit. When things got too much, she helped me through it. And the other person is Eric. Eric is kind of my work wife, I guess. He's my partner since the very beginning of Track.js and my CTO. And he built a lot of what the product actually does, especially since I moved into more of a talking kind of role. He built a lot of what everything it does and the concepts behind what it could be. Eric is a developer who can get between a concept and working code faster than I've seen anybody else do it. He's also a leader and took over when I couldn't handle it. If I burned myself out working too much, he would tell me to take some time off, and he would keep the ship running while I regrouped. And I did the same for him because we burned ourselves out a lot. We had this saying with each other that because we were always running fast at something, like something was always the next priority, and we would burn ourselves out. And so we would tell ourselves, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We're not trying to like get this one thing done and then the product will be successful. It's only going to be successful if we keep going over the long term. Energy to continue was our biggest asset. Everybody else was going to flame out when VC cash went dry or whatever, is what we would tell ourselves. We just had to outlast them. So the most important lesson of this story is that you shouldn't do it alone. I can't imagine starting a company by myself. It would be too hard. I would quit. I need that support network, both at home and at work. The company will pull all of your time. So if you want to have any time for yourself, you need someone to help keep you grounded. And if you care about what you're doing, and you should, you'll burn yourself out probably and want to quit. And you need somebody else in that company to keep it going when you rage quit for a week, so that it's still alive when you change your mind and come back to it. That's my fifth story about don't go it alone. If you're going to build something, you're going to need smart people by your side to help you make sure it doesn't fail. By 2020, I had achieved what I thought success was. I controlled my time. I controlled my independence. I felt like I got prestige from building something really important that got used by developers all around the world. Plus, I had a little bit of that guacamole money in my pocket, which was pretty good. But I had this nagging feeling. Could I do this again? Had I just gotten lucky? Maybe I just timed a market really well, and could I build something else and be successful again? Despite all the pain and all the stress and all the anxiety that goes into building something, I kind of wanted to do it again. So I looked around for a problem that I could work on. And this buzzword, this observability word, has been a hot industry thing for the last few years. Your ability to understand your production system as it's running, which is kind of like what I've been doing for a long time. Everybody that was talking about observability was totally focused on the cloud or on Kubernetes or on server stuff or on cloud stuff. There was very little talk about how the end user experience fit into this. And to me, as somebody who always started from like an end user point of view, that seemed like a real miss. So I had this idea that we were going to start another tool called Request Metrics. And Request Metrics was going to be the world's first client-side observability tool. We were going to look at the APIs of your system from the end user's perspective and combine that with analytics and events and errors so you could see your client-side code and how the users were going through it. I thought it was really cool. Beyond that, where did the user come from? Like, what did they do? Integrating analytics and data into the observability stack, understanding security, what vendors did you trust code to run on your site? We built all of this stuff out. Like, this all worked. We could show you like what domains we're running. It was cool as hell. It was huge and it was ambitious and it was a huge mistake. The biggest mistake that we made building this out is that we didn't talk to enough people who actually used monitoring software about what they wanted. I didn't have a lot of conversations with DevOps engineers or people specializing in observability practices about what they wanted to see, what they cared about with the client side. I didn't really talk to a lot of front-end engineers about what gaps they saw in their monitoring or what might be opportunities. I just kind of assumed that I knew because I was a developer and I cared about it. And it turns out most DevOps people don't give a crap about the client side. It's just not their scope of responsibility. It might be interesting, but if it comes down to actually making changes or getting a budget to look at that stuff, it wasn't there. Client side is outside of their realm of responsibility. On the front end, I was building things that spanned too many different roles. It turns out that marketing people really liked the analytics tools they had. And front-end engineers are pretty satisfied with their options for error monitoring. And security folks already had a bunch of auditing tools that they were comfortable with. So I was trying to build something for all of these different people and failing at it. I was trying to do everything, so I wasn't really competitive at anything. Compiling onto that problem, I was using words that people didn't understand. Observability is a DevOps word. And if you say that to a marketer or a front-end engineer, they probably don't know what that means. And it probably just turned them off right then. So I had spent a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money trying to create something that wasn't going to work. And it's because I made a very rookie mistake. Is I didn't build products that solve real problems. The things I was solving were problems that didn't exist. No real person with a real budget out there in the world cared about this thing, cared about uniting all these different facets of client-side observability. At least not yet. Maybe we were just ahead of our time. I had been overly confident that I understood what people wanted when I needed to spend more time listening to more of our customers. You could also say that I failed to follow my own lesson. If I wasn't embarrassed of it, I waited too long to ship. We built a ton of capability in this client-side observability platform that we probably shouldn't have. It wasn't like gold-plated behind the scenes or anything, but we were real deep into this product concept without getting a whole lot of validation that anything that we were doing was particularly valuable. Request metrics, that iteration of it failed. But behind every overnight success story are years and years of trying and failing. And that does not mean that we are going to quit. We learn from our mistakes, we get up and we try again. Because just because we failed once doesn't mean that we're going to fail the next time. So I went and I started talking to people, lots of people, about websites, web applications, user experiences, and what sort of things they struggled with. And the most common pattern that I heard was around web performance. And we had some proof of this too. Like in the users that we did get around the first version of request metrics, they would spend the vast majority of their time exploring performance problems over anything else. It turns out most developers don't know how to make things fast, or at least that's not their priority. And this problem got a lot more important recently because of something that Google did. Google came up with this new set of measurements called the Core Web Vitals to try and objectively measure whether a site is fast or slow. Something that they could actually compare site A versus site B and decide which site is faster. And they said that they were going to start using this to influence SEO scores, to influence PageRank. And they did. Started in 2021. They made it part of PageRank. And suddenly there's this external pressure that your site has to be fast, or you're not going to rank well for the search results that you need to rank for. Performance is now suddenly important for an external reason beyond just feeling pride that your site is fast. PageRank is the lifeblood of a lot of businesses, particularly e-commerce, content sites, media sites, advertisers, that sort of thing. Here was a real set of users with a real problem that was worth real money if we could help more website operators understand their web performance and understand what was it that was making their site slow and how to make it faster. Here's a real thing with money behind it. And that's how you start. So we tried again. We built a new version of request metrics. Focused, it wasn't really a new version. We kind of built a new one within the shell of the old one. but we refocused it entirely on web performance problems, particularly around the core web vitals, because that's the thing that is actually important for your SEO scores. And start speaking to that specific niche of engineers that are facing those challenges. And that's this really important lesson, is to build products that solve real problems for real people. If you're not doing that, if that's not at the core of what you're doing, and you're confident that it is a real product with real people, with real money behind it, then we're really just over-engineering things, unless we know this. So we've been building that. If you're interested in checking that out, if that sounds like you, if you work on an e-commerce site and you want to check that out, give this thing a scan. It'll take you out to requestmetrics.com, and I'd love to chat with you more about it afterwards. That is my 6th story about building things for real people, or you're just lighting money on fire. And so for me, the definition of success has shifted throughout my career. It used to mean prestige, then it meant independence, then it meant time. It's probably going to change again before I'm done. Your definition does not need to be the same as mine. And it doesn't need to be the same 10 years from now as it is for you now. But you should think about what it is and what it is you want, because you don't have as much time as you think you do. Remember, like, I didn't know what I was doing, and then bam, car accident, almost died. Get everything you can out of today, because it might be over tomorrow. And don't worry. Don't worry if you don't know what you're doing, because none of us do when we start out. Everybody is just making it up as they go. There's no reason you can't too. You don't need permission to start. Just go and learn what you can along the way. But remember, no matter what you do or what you want out of life, you need to build relationships with the people around you that will pay huge dividends to you later that you could never imagine. Building these relationships with other people is about getting out of that comfort zone of just working on code. It's about like connecting to the why are we building this? What is it going to solve? Who else should be involved? Who do I need to talk to make this thing successful? And if you choose to go down the entrepreneurial path like I did, there's some pitfalls that you're probably going to hit. First, if you're not embarrassed of it, you waited too long to ship it. Get it out. Learning whether or not somebody cares about this is the most important thing. Second, make sure to leverage those relationships and get people by your side to help you through it, because you shouldn't do it alone. And be sure to get off the computer and go talk to real people. And be sure to get off the computer and talk to real people and understand real problems, or you're just building a fun tech demo. It's way more satisfying to build something that real people use and get some of that sweet guacamole money for your trouble. Thank you so much. This was Success on Your Own Terms. I hope I inspired you a little bit to go and try and do something great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this. I'm going to say emotional roller coaster, because I was heartfelt and happy and sad at the same time. So it was very insightful and very impactful. So thank you so much for this great closure for the overall ABP.NET conference. And we appreciate your time and your effort on doing this, making this happen for us. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, we will move on to the closing and ruffle announcements after this part is over, which is, so thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you so much for being with us today, Todd. Have a great
Take care, everybody.
rest of your day, and we'll see you on the closing. Bye.